Ladies and gentlemen, trainers, dubious scientists, and marine creatures with attitude problems. Welcome to City Gamer, the only channel where documentaries are as serious as a Magikarp trying to climb stairs. Today we bring you a masterpiece of knowledge. A deep, educational, and absolutely unnecessary journey into the life of one of the beach's most temperamental Pokémon, Krabby. And all of this narrated by the one and only, the incomparable, the slightly questionable in his scientific methods, Professor Pokemuff, live from his laboratory, which probably doesn't meet a single safety regulation. But before this documentary changes your lives forever, or at least makes you question why a crab eats sand, I need you to do something extremely important. Subscribe to the channel. Yes, now. Not later. Not when you have time. Right now. Because every subscription feeds Professor Pokemuff's ego and keeps this project running. A project that clearly shouldn't have a budget. And of course, leave your like. That magical button that tells us you too want more absurdly serious documentaries about creatures that solve all their problems with pincers. If you don't, well, let's just say Krabby might appear under your bed tonight to evaluate your life choices. So get ready, because you're about to enter the world of Pokemon puppets, where science is dubious, logic is optional, and entertainment is guaranteed. Or at least that's what the contract says. Introduction: The terror of sandcastles. On the seemingly tranquil beaches of the Pokemon world, where waves break gently and Wingull do their thing stealing food like seasoned criminals, there exists a silent threat, buried beneath the sand, waiting for the exact moment to ruin the happiness of anyone with beachfront architectural dreams. That terror has a name: Krabby. At first glance, you'd think it's a small, harmless red crab, one of those that walks sideways as if avoiding responsibilities. But that's exactly the kind of mistake that turns a day of rest into a tragedy worthy of a dramatic documentary with violin music. Krabby doesn't just live on the beach. Krabby is the beach. Every grain of sand could potentially be its territory, its private property, its crustacean empire. Not legally registered but defended with an intensity that would make any security guard blush. Picture this. You spend hours building a sandcastle. Towers, walls, even a little moat with water that doesn't work but makes you proud. You step back for 2 seconds to admire your work. And suddenly, a pincer emerges from the ground as if the sand itself had decided to take revenge on you. That's Krabby saying, "Demolition approved." And it's not that he does it out of pure malice. Well, maybe a little. But really, Krabby is extremely territorial. To him, your castle isn't a work of art. It's an invasion. It's like someone building a shopping mall in your living room while you're distracted watching TV. The reaction is immediate. Pincers up. Intense stare. Combat stance that clearly says this little crustacean is ready to escalate the conflict to completely unnecessary levels. What's most unsettling is that Krabby doesn't need to be big to command respect. He measures less than half a meter, but he acts like he's the final boss of the beach. He doesn't run. He doesn't flee. He stands there, judging your decisions, questioning your existence, and evaluating whether you deserve to keep walking on his sand. Researchers have reached a worrying conclusion. If a beach seems calm, it's probably because the Krabby are already watching. They're always watching. So next time you step on sand, do it carefully. Because beneath your feet there could be a small crab with big ambitions, ready to remind you that in his world, you are the visitor, and he is the absolute owner of the terrain. Anatomy of an overarmed crab. If you observe Krabby closely, it's impossible not to wonder who was in charge of its biological design, and why they decided to bet everything, absolutely everything, on a single feature. Because let's be honest, this Pokemon isn't a crab. It's basically a pair of pincers with an optional body attached as decoration. Its structure is simple but unsettling. A tough, compact shell, as if ready to survive an intense family argument or even a direct hit from reality. Beneath it, relatively small legs that seem to constantly wonder how they ended up working for such heavy-duty construction tools. And then there are the pincers. Those monumental, disproportionate, exaggerated pincers that clearly didn't get the memo about bodily balance. They're so large that you'd expect Krabby to walk in circles or just tip over like a poorly designed table. But no. Somehow, this little biomechanical genius manages to move sideways like it's nothing, as if carrying 2 excavators in its arms were completely normal. Experts still debate how Krabby coordinates its movements without collapsing under its own dramatic weight. Some suggest its muscles are highly specialized, while others have simply decided not to question it too much for fear of being pinched during the investigation. The most impressive thing is that these pincers aren't just big for show. They're multifunctional tools. They serve to attack, defend, grip objects, dig, intimidate, point at things aggressively, and probably to express unsolicited opinions in beachside debates. Furthermore, Krabby possesses a capability that makes it the biological equivalent of a vehicle with replaceable parts. If it loses a pincer in battle, it doesn't have an existential crisis or write a sad diary entry. It simply regenerates it, as if saying, "No big deal, I have unlimited spare parts." This raises an unsettling question. If it can regenerate a pincer, what stops it from growing more and more? Is there a Krabby somewhere with pincers so large they need their own zip code? Science isn't ready to answer that yet. Its design, though seemingly ridiculous, is actually a masterpiece of extreme specialization. It's not fast, not particularly elegant, and definitely wouldn't win a balance contest. But the moment those pincers come into action, it's clear that Krabby needs nothing else. In short, Krabby's anatomy can be described as a bold statement against moderation. While other Pokémon seek balance, harmony, and proportion, Krabby chose the path of excess. And it did so with such confidence that, somehow, it works. The pincers. Solution to everything. In Krabby's world, there are no complex problems. No philosophical dilemmas. No difficult decisions. No need to consult an expert. Because for this little crustacean, life boils down to a single universal tool, an elegant, direct, and slightly aggressive solution: the pincers. Is there an enemy in front? Pincers. Is there something to move? Pincers. Is there sand to dig? Pincers. Is there an argument that could clearly be resolved by talking? Absolutely pincers. Krabby's pincers aren't just limbs. They're a life philosophy. They represent a practical approach where every situation, regardless of complexity, can be resolved by applying enough lateral pressure and a determined attitude. What's fascinating is the precision with which Krabby uses these tools. We're not talking about a simple, clumsy movement. No. Krabby calculates, observes, measures the distance, and then executes an attack or action with the confidence of someone who knows they have the right answer before even hearing the question. There are those who say Krabby could open a safe, solve a puzzle, and prepare a gourmet meal using only its pincers. Maybe it wouldn't do it well, but it would definitely try with impressive confidence. And if we're talking about combat, the pincers become something much more serious. They're capable of exerting considerable force, enough to push back much larger opponents. At that moment, Krabby stops being that little beach dweller and transforms into a kind of tactical machine of perfectly calibrated pinches. But what's truly absurd, what elevates Krabby to another level, is its emotional relationship with these tools. Because when it loses a pincer, it doesn't panic. It doesn't stop. It doesn't reconsider its life choices. It simply waits, and gets another one. It's as if it lives with the tranquility of someone who knows they'll always have a plan B, C, and probably even a plan D, all in the shape of a pincer. This gives it a huge psychological advantage. While other Pokémon hesitate, tire out, or worry about their limitations, Krabby moves forward with almost unsettling confidence. Because in its mind, as long as there's at least one pincer available, the situation remains completely under control. In essence, the pincers aren't just a part of Krabby. They are its identity, its strategy, its survival tool, and its automatic response to any inconvenience. A simple, direct, and surprisingly effective system that proves that sometimes you don't need to complicate things. You just need two giant pincers and zero doubts. The mysterious habitat of Krabby. Krabby's habitat is, in theory, quite simple. Beaches, coastal areas, places where water and sand coexist in apparent harmony. A relaxing environment, ideal for resting, listening to the waves, and forgetting stress. Which is ironic, because Krabby is the exact opposite of relaxing. To truly understand its habitat, you have to grasp a fundamental truth. The beach is not an open space. It's not a shared place. It's not a tourist destination. It is, from Krabby's perspective, an infinite collection of private properties delimited by paranoia and defended with pincers. Krabby doesn't just live in the sand. It buries itself in it. It disappears completely, as if it were an expert in stealth techniques or a retired spy who decided to swap infiltration for marine life. It only leaves its eyes visible, observing, analyzing, judging every movement that happens on the surface. From below, Krabby perceives vibrations. Every step, every jump, every failed attempt to run on the hot sand is detected. To it, you're not an innocent visitor. You're a possible threat, a potential invader, or at best, someone who hasn't made a mistake yet, but is about to. Its burrow isn't just a hiding spot. It's an operations base, a surveillance center, a headquarters from which it plans its next move, which usually consists of emerging from the sand at the most inconvenient moment possible for everyone involved. What's most curious is that Krabby rarely seems completely at ease. Even when no one is around, it maintains an alert attitude, as if waiting for something to happen. Maybe a suspicious Wingull. Maybe another Krabby with expansionist ideas. Maybe just the abstract concept of problems. This behavior has led many experts to wonder whether Krabby actually enjoys its habitat or simply patrols it constantly like a guard who never asked for that shift. Moreover, its choice of locations isn't random. It prefers areas where the sand is soft enough to dig quickly, but firm enough to support its weight and that of its disproportionate pincers. It is, in a sense, an architect of the underground, designing invisible tunnels that connect strategic points of the beach. And then there's the surprise factor. Because in Krabby's habitat, danger doesn't come from what you see, but from what you don't see. A misstep, a badly placed foot, and suddenly the sand comes alive, emerging in the form of an indignant crab that clearly did not approve of your presence. In summary, Krabby's habitat isn't just a physical place. It's a constant surveillance system, a network of hidden tunnels, and a stage where every grain of sand could be part of a larger strategy. An environment where tranquility is an illusion and where, at any moment, you might discover you were never really alone. Because if there's one thing certain on Krabby's beach, it's this. He already knew you were coming, long before you decided to do it. The strangest diet in the Pokémon ocean. In the vast and diverse world of Pokémon nutrition, there are diets of all kinds. Some feed on carefully selected berries, others hunt prey with millimeter precision, and then there's Krabby, who at some point looked at the ground and said, "Yes, this looks edible." Krabby's diet is, to put it elegantly, baffling. Because when food is scarce, this little survival genius doesn't panic, doesn't organize a desperate search, and doesn't reflect on its situation. No, it simply decides to eat the sand. Yes, sand. The very material that every other living being tries to avoid in their food at all costs. Krabby considers a valid option on its menu. Not as a side dish, not as a culinary accident, but as a main course. Scientists have tried to explain this behavior for years. Some suggest it obtains microscopic nutrients present in the sand. Others believe it's simply too committed to its environment not to include it in its diet. And then there are those who have decided not to think about it too much for the sake of their mental stability. What's most impressive is the naturalness with which Krabby does it. No hesitation, no dramatic pause. It simply takes some sand with its pincers and proceeds as if savoring a gourmet delicacy at a 5-star restaurant. One could imagine other Pokémon watching the scene with a mixture of confusion and concern. A Pikachu questioning its life choices. A Psyduck trying to process what it just saw and failing as usual. But for Krabby, this isn't strange. It's efficiency. It's adaptation. It's living proof that when life gives you sand, you eat it and move on without asking questions. Of course, this doesn't mean sand is its only food source. Krabby also consumes small marine organisms, but that detail is usually completely overshadowed by the fact that at any moment, it might decide the ground is a perfectly acceptable snack. This behavior gives it a considerable advantage. While other Pokémon depend on specific resources, Krabby can survive practically anywhere there's sand. Which, considering its habitat, is basically saying it always has something to eat, even if that something makes everyone else raise an eyebrow in concern. In summary, Krabby's diet defies expectations, breaks norms, and raises questions that probably no one wanted to ask. It's a reminder that survival isn't always elegant, but it can be incredibly effective. And it's also a reminder that no matter how bad your day is, at least you're not eating sand by choice. Or at least we hope so. Defense strategies worthy of a dramatic actor. In the competitive world of Pokémon survival, many opt for clear and direct strategies. Some flee, others attack, and a few use complex abilities that require years of training. Krabby, for its part, decided to explore a different path. Drama. When threatened, Krabby doesn't just react. It performs. It becomes the protagonist, director, and lead actor in a scene charged with unnecessary intensity. Its first tactic consists of puffing up slightly and generating foam around its body, as if saying, "Get ready, because this just got serious," even though it actually measures less than half a meter. The foam isn't just defensive. It's a visual resource. It's spectacle. It's how Krabby tries to convince the world that it's facing a creature much larger, much more dangerous, and definitely much more important than its size suggests. And the funny thing is, in many cases, it works. Because it's not just about appearance, but attitude. Krabby accompanies this demonstration with a rigid posture, pincers raised, and a fixed stare that conveys a mix of determination and mild personal offense, as if your very presence were a direct insult to its lifestyle. It is, in essence, a master of stage deception. Where other Pokémon would use speed or strength, Krabby uses presence. It builds a narrative. It generates tension. It makes the opponent doubt for a second. And in that second, it already has the advantage. But it's not all acting. If the show doesn't achieve its goal, Krabby doesn't hesitate to move to the next act, one much less artistic and considerably more painful. The pincers come into action with a precision that makes it clear that behind all that theatrics, there is a real defensive capability. What's fascinating is the combination of both strategies. First it intimidates, then it attacks. First it exaggerates, then it confirms. It's as if it's saying, this can stay a play, or we can turn it into an interactive experience. This behavior has led some researchers to consider that Krabby possesses a level of strategic intelligence greater than it appears. Not because it's particularly complex, but because it perfectly understands the value of psychological impact. Furthermore, there's something deeply human about the way it reacts. That need to appear larger when feeling vulnerable, to exaggerate the situation to compensate for its limitations. It's a reminder that even in the Pokémon world, drama remains a surprisingly effective tool. In conclusion, Krabby's defensive strategies aren't just functional, they're also memorable. It doesn't just survive. It ensures that everyone present remembers the moment. Because if someone is going to invade its territory, at least they're going to witness a performance worthy of applause. Or of running away. The social life of a grumpy hermit. Krabby's social life is, in simple terms, an optional concept. While other Pokémon form groups, develop bonds, and share experiences, Krabby has decided that the best possible relationship is the one that doesn't happen. This little beach dweller isn't exactly the life of the party. In fact, if there were a party on the beach, Krabby would be the one who shows up just to assess the situation, judge everyone present, and then slowly retreat while maintaining awkward eye contact. Its solitary nature isn't accidental. Krabby prefers to avoid conflicts, which is ironic, because its way of avoiding conflict often looks like the start of one. It keeps its distance, burrows itself, observes from afar, and acts as if any social interaction were a potential threat to its emotional and territorial stability. When it encounters another Krabby, the situation can become tense. No friendly greetings, no cordial exchange of opinions on the quality of the sand that day. There are stares. Lots of stares. A silence loaded with meaning, as if both are deciding whether to share the space or turn it into a diplomatic battlefield. In some cases, they manage to coexist, but under very specific conditions. Each keeps its distance, respects certain invisible boundaries, and avoids any movement that could be interpreted as provocation. It is, in essence, a relationship based on strict tolerance and constant vigilance. However, this doesn't mean Krabby is completely antisocial. It simply has standards, extremely high, and a fairly limited patience. If another Pokémon gets too close, invades its space, or worse, accidentally steps on its territory, Krabby won't hesitate to start a conversation with its pincers. Its way of communicating is direct, clear, and hard to misinterpret. It doesn't use complex gestures or ambiguous signals. If Krabby has something to say, it will make it evident in a matter of seconds, usually accompanied by a defensive posture and an expression that clearly indicates this interaction wasn't part of its plans. Despite all this, there's something fascinating about its behavior. Krabby doesn't seek company, but it doesn't seem to need it either. It has perfected an independent lifestyle where each day consists of patrolling its territory, digging, observing, and occasionally overreacting to minimal stimuli. It's a hermit, yes, but one completely convinced it's making the best possible decision. While other Pokémon depend on groups and social dynamics, Krabby has opted for self-sufficiency, total control of its environment, and a tranquility that is only interrupted when someone makes the mistake of getting too close. In conclusion, Krabby's social life may not be extensive, but it is intensely consistent with its personality. It doesn't need friends, doesn't seek company, and is definitely not interested in unnecessary conversations. It has its space, its rules, and its pincers. And for it, that's more than enough. Every Krabby's dream, becoming Kingler. Everything in Krabby's life seems to revolve around a very clear idea. Growing, improving, evolving. But not in the philosophical sense of becoming a better version of itself. No, Krabby has a much more specific goal, much more direct, and honestly, much more intimidating. Becoming Kingler. Evolution occurs when Krabby reaches a certain level of experience, which in practical terms means it has spent enough time solving problems with its pincers to unlock an even more exaggerated version of itself. And this is where nature makes an interesting decision. Instead of balancing its body, improving its mobility, or making it more agile, evolution decides that the best course is to take everything that was already disproportionate and take it to a completely absurd level. Kingler isn't just a bigger Krabby. It's the materialization of all its life choices taken to the extreme. Its body grows, its presence commands, but above all, one of its pincers becomes something that defies all logic. It's gigantic, dominant, almost as if it had developed its own personality. It's as if evolution said, let's solve the balance problem by eliminating any attempt at balance. For a Krabby, this change isn't just physical. It's psychological. Going from being a small territorial guardian to becoming an imposing force of the beach represents the fulfillment of everything it ever aspired to. It's the moment when it no longer needs to exaggerate its size with dramatic foam, because now it really is a presence difficult to ignore. However, this power has its own challenges. Handling a pincer of that size is no simple task. It requires control, precision, and probably a good amount of practice to not accidentally hit everything around it, including its own pride. Still, Kingler doesn't seem to have a problem with that. If anything defines this evolution, it's absolute confidence. Where there was attitude, there is now authority. Where there was warning, there is now immediate execution. What's fascinating is that, in essence, it's still the same Krabby. Same personality, same temperament, same philosophy of solving everything with pincers. The only difference is that its solutions are now considerably harder to ignore. This process raises an interesting reflection. Does Krabby evolve to become stronger? Or simply to prove that it was always right to trust so much in its pincers? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. For any Krabby, becoming Kingler isn't just a change. It's a statement. It's the moment it stops being a potential threat and becomes an impossible-to-ignore reality. And for anyone who's been pinched by one, it's the moment you start reconsidering all the decisions that led you to be so close. Curiosities of Kanto's most famous crab. When it comes to Krabby, the curiosities aren't just interesting facts. They're small pieces of evidence confirming that this Pokémon decided to live its life under completely different rules from the rest of the world. To start, Krabby is part of the first generation, meaning it has been present from the very beginning, observing, judging, and probably silently criticizing all trainers since the days when everything was pixelated and life choices were questionable. It is, in a sense, a war veteran, although its main war has always been against anything that moves on its beach. For a long time, Krabby and its evolution were the only ones capable of using a certain signature move that basically consists of striking with a pincer with excessive confidence. This not only reinforces its identity but also makes it clear that if there's one tool it masters, it's going to perfect it until it becomes an art. Another interesting curiosity is its perfect gender balance. Half male, half female, as if even nature had decided that, in Krabby's case, the only thing that should be balanced is its population, because it's definitely not its anatomy. There's also the famous case of that Krabby that evolved in the middle of a battle, as if it had decided that was the ideal moment for a dramatic transformation. Not after, not before, but right when everyone was watching. Because if this evolutionary line likes one thing, it's spectacle. And then there's its general behavior, which could be described as a mix of constant vigilance and mild suspicion towards everything that exists. Whether you're a trainer, another Pokémon, or just someone walking without ill intent, for Krabby, there's always the possibility that you're about to do something wrong, and it's there to make sure it reacts accordingly. Even its sideways walking has generated all kinds of theories. Some say it's an efficient evolutionary adaptation. Others believe it simply doesn't want to look directly where it's going, because that would imply trusting the environment too much. And Krabby trusts no one. In summary, every curiosity about Krabby only reinforces the idea that we're dealing with a Pokémon that, though small, has a disproportionately intense personality. It's ancient, specialized, distrustful, and absolutely committed to its lifestyle. A crab that not only left its mark on Kanto but also made it clear that sometimes, you don't have to be the biggest to be the most memorable. You just need the right attitude, and a pair of pincers that speak for you. Conclusion: a little grouch with big pincers. After observing, analyzing, and probably being silently judged by him throughout this entire documentary, it's clear that Krabby isn't just another Pokémon on the beach. It's an experience, a phenomenon, a small force of nature with the attitude of a territorial manager. Throughout its life, Krabby has proven that it doesn't need size, speed, or a particularly complex strategy to stand out. It only needs two fundamental things: unshakable determination and a pair of pincers that clearly don't know the meaning of moderation. It's a being that has perfected the art of exaggerating every situation. If there's calm, it suspects. If there's movement, it reacts. If there's a sandcastle, it considers it an act of war. Its world doesn't operate in middle grounds, and that's precisely what makes it so memorable. Krabby represents that energy we've all felt at some point. That need to protect our personal space as if it were sacred territory. That slightly exaggerated reaction when something doesn't go as expected. Except it takes it to another level, one where every problem can be solved with enough conviction and pincer pressure. What's most fascinating is that, despite its character, its behavior, and its clear tendency toward drama, Krabby works. It survives, adapts, and maintains its place in an ecosystem that isn't always simple. And it does so without changing its essence, without softening its attitude, and without questioning its methods. In a world full of impressive, giant, and powerful creatures, Krabby stands out for something much simpler but equally effective: personality. A personality so strong that it turns every little encounter into an event worth remembering. So next time you think of the beach as a peaceful place, remember this. The sun may be shining, the sea may be calm, and everything might seem perfect. But somewhere, right beneath the sand, there's a little crab watching, waiting, and probably preparing a completely disproportionate reaction to your next step. Because Krabby doesn't just live on the beach. Krabby is the reason the beach never feels completely safe again. The end. And so, after this profound, rigorous, and slightly questionable scientific analysis, we come to the end of this documentary on Pokémon puppets, narrated by the incomparable Professor Pokemuff, who is probably still arguing with a Krabby on the beach while trying to defend his thesis on why sand shouldn't be considered food. If you made it this far, there are two possibilities. First, you're genuinely interested in the fascinating world of Pokémon. Second, you're now afraid to step on sand without asking permission first. Either way, you're in the right place. But before you go off to check every beach with paranoia, there's something extremely important you must do. Subscribe to the channel. Yes, that button many see but few press with the commitment it deserves. Do it now and become part of this community where science, humor, and questionable decisions coexist in perfect harmony. Also, leave your like. It's not just a symbolic gesture. It's the signal that tells the algorithm that this type of content deserves to exist, which is a risk we're all willing to take. Plus, every like reduces by a small percentage the probability of a Krabby appearing under your bed tonight to evaluate your recent actions. Turn on notifications, because you clearly don't want to miss the next documentary narrated by Professor Pokemuff, who might be investigating anything from adorable creatures to threats with pincers that clearly have attitude problems. And if you want to take this to the next level, you can become a member of the channel. By doing so, you'll get early access to videos before their public release, which basically turns you into a kind of elite researcher within this universe where everything is slightly absurd but surprisingly educational. So now you know. Subscribe, leave your like, hit the bell, and consider joining as a member. Because this isn't just a channel, it's an experience you didn't know you needed. And remember, next time you see sand, look at it twice. Because someone might already be looking at you first.